Hello and welcome to the state of Kentucky. I'm Bruce Maples, publisher of Forward Kentucky, and we're glad to have you with us today. If you are watching us live, I want to remind you that if you comment on Facebook or YouTube, we can see the comments and we might share them in the show. And if you have questions for me or for our guests, be sure and post them as comments and we'll bring them up on the show. I would also like to note that if you have ideas or suggestions for future shows or people you'd like to have on, just send those to tips@forwardky.com. So today we have a special guest, and I'm interested to hear what he has to say. He recently did an article for us on his projections of how the state house races are going to go. And unlike some of us who just sort of put our emotions out there and say, well, this is how I would like for it to go, he actually used something called math and put together a table that you can find on our website of all the races in the House and which ones look solid Republican and which ones look solid Democrat and so on and so forth. And then he used the governor's race, the results from the governor's race by district and the 2018 midterms by district to inform which ones he thought might be possible pickups for either party and possible losses for either party. And I find his analysis really interesting. We already had Robert Connie on our site, who is one of the co-hosts of My Old Kentucky podcast, who did his own article. And his and our guests overlap some, but there's some of them are different too. So today we're going to welcome Dr. Trent Garrison to the show, and we're glad to have him. Trent, welcome.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. I really appreciate it. And I am looking forward to getting into this because, as you said, you know, it's really easy to find plenty of things going on at the national level. You know, with Senate and with president and all that stuff. I mean, there are polls out, right. Numerous polls out every day. But, you know, with Kentucky on these state level House races, it's a little bit more difficult to find information. So that's one of the reasons that motivated me to do this. I wanted to know more about it myself.
Before we get into that, why don't you give us just a little bit of your background about what you have been doing and what you're doing now?
Yeah, as far as professionally?
Yeah.
I've
and politically.
And politically, all right. Well, as far as my background goes, I'm not a political scientist. I'm a geoscientist. I grew up in bright red southeastern Kentucky in a place called Hyden, Leslie County, and just kind of appreciated the environment and nature. So I went to school, went into geology. I really liked that. And went to Eastern, then later UK for my PhD. But during that time, I worked in between times of master's and PhD. I worked for the state for a little over 6 years, and I really started appreciating policy during that time period. I saw just how important it was. Yeah. So I went back to Kentucky State University and did some graduate work in public administration. And that kind of changed the trajectory of my career a little bit. I got more and more involved in policy, especially at the state level. Mm-hmm. And I've been a kind of a legislative liaison in different capacities over the last, I guess, about 3 years. So I've gotten a chance to know quite a few of the state legislators that we have now. Some have moved on, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Right. But you know, for all those reasons, I got really curious because I hadn't seen that anyone had done any sort of research that specifically put a label on it. I know, I've read, you know, the Courier Journal did a piece, and right. Robert, as you mentioned earlier, did a piece, and those are great. But as far as like actually putting a rating on it, whether it's toss up or lean, like folks do in the national politics, I wanted to stick my head out there, and which is a little dangerous, but I wanted to do that.
So let's lay the groundwork for the people who are watching. At the legislative level in Kentucky, the Senate, which has 38 8 seats, has been Republican majority for a while. We could go into the history of that, about the flip of a couple of people from Democratic to Republicans so that they could turn the Senate over to the Republicans. But they've been in charge in the Senate for a long time. The Democrats, on the other hand, held the House of Representatives for 100 and something years, maybe.
Yeah, 90 something years.
Yeah. And it was the last Southern House, it was the last Southern chamber, House or Senate, to flip from Democratic to Republican. And it happened in the 2016 Trump wave here in the state. And then now the Republicans in both houses have a supermajority. So the House is 68 Republicans, something like that?
I think it's 62 to 38, and
Okay.
the Senate is 28 to 10. Those numbers may be a little off, but that's what it was the last time I wrote it down. Anyway,
Right.
So it is supermajority, yes.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that on a national level, there's a lot of good feelings among the Democrats, and they feel like, this is going to go their way. On a state level, what do you think is happening, or what do you see happening on the state level in terms of the Democratic Party?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And as I wrote in the article, Kentuckians, just to back up a little bit, I've been on the phone a lot recently with folks from out of state who are interested in knowing that the answer to that very question, what's going on here on the ground, and just trying to get a better understanding of Kentucky politics in general. And like I said, I addressed that a little bit in the article, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on it as well. But it seems like, in my experience, a lot of the times when something's going on at the national level that influences trends around the country,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't really affect what's going on at the state level and below in Kentucky politics as much as you might think it would.
Right.
These waves. Kentucky, for whatever reason, we've had a very large number of Democrats in control and registered Democrats relative to registered Republicans in the past. Now, that's been tightening over the last number of years, but we still do have quite a few more registered Democrats than we do Republicans, and a large number of independents as well. So I think, what's happening is people get to know in the smaller areas, especially, people get to know their legislators and don't really see them as Democrats and don't really see them as Republicans as much as somebody they know personally in the neighborhood that they see at the store, and they become able to, they feel like they trust them because they know them, and they look
Right.
beyond those party labels, so it doesn't matter as much.
The other thing that I find interesting is that, the old Mark Twain quote about, when the end of the world comes, I want to be in Kentucky because we're always 20 years behind. It feels like the turning red here is literally years behind some of the rest of the country. And then the turning back to blue. Barry Craig and I have talked about this multiple times, that Kentucky will eventually be much stronger democratically once younger people grow up, because there's a lot of young adults, teenagers, young adults, even median adults, who aren't conservative, and they don't buy into the gay bashing or the racism or any of that stuff like that, and they're going to become much more diverse, and they're going to be much more, I think, democratic over time. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. People have been talking about that for a long time, and I generally agree with that assessment that over time Kentucky will slowly go the way of trending a little bit bluer, but we have trailed behind that progression, and I'm very curious about that. I've taught college at the college level at either part-time adjunct or as an assistant professor for 14 years now. Right. And some of the main issues that they're concerned with in the, let's say, 18 to 25 year old range are healthcare, justice of various sorts, and climate change is one of the biggest ones. I've taught science and science policy, for a while, and those are issues that are not quite in line as far as main priorities with some of the people have been in legislature for a long time. If you mention climate change, for example,
Yeah.
That issue is just kind of laughed at. And that does not resonate well with younger Americans.
So let's jump into some of the races here. I don't know if you read Robert's analysis of the governor's race last fall, but he picked up what he said were four areas that Democrats had some strength. The first being Louisville and Lexington. Obviously, that's pretty obvious. The second was small towns and suburbia, basically. The third was Eastern Kentucky, and the fourth was Northern Kentucky. So let's get into some races. Where do you think Democrats, either based on individual persons or on your analysis, where do you think Democrats have a chance to pick up seats in the House, and why?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I was actually on another show earlier this week in the Louisville area, and they asked that very question. I do agree that the moving to the outskirts of Lexington and Louisville and into the suburbs, the urban sprawl is going to be the urban sprawl of more liberal voters eventually. I think I actually lived in Northern Kentucky for 3 years. I taught up there, and there are lots of really cool little neighborhood. I don't know what else to call them, little townships, I guess, but also neighborhoods. There are just so many of them. There's Campbell County, Kenton County, Boone County, and a bunch of other places around that area. And many of those are, younger people, just had kids. And if you drive around, it's over in the inner areas of it. It's overwhelmingly, from my experience, in an election year, overwhelmingly Democratic signs. Lived in Fort Thomas a while, or lots of Rachel Roberts signs when I was up there in 2018.
Right.
Jason Kilmer signs, and areas like that. So I do agree that Northern Kentucky is an area ripe for picking, so to speak.
Okay.
Campbell County and Kenton County, if I'm not mistaken, both went blue in the 2019, at least for Bashir, went blue. So that's an interesting area as well. Eastern Kentucky is difficult. It's a hodgepodge of old school Democrats, new school Democrats, if you want to call them that, versus liberals and just independents who don't trust the government in general. I'm from a very, very red area, and I don't think that's in the southeastern part is going to change anytime soon. But there are up and coming areas that tend to be a little bit more progressive than others. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned, alluded to earlier, if you have politicians in those areas running as like a figure that would influence or just motivate voters from center to left to to a little bit right, I think there's some potential for pickups there.
So let's get down to specifics. If you were going to list your top 3 or 4 possible House pickups for Democrats, what would they be?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess I should explain very briefly first on how I did this analysis.
Okay.
As I mentioned in the article, I know it's a little bit dangerous, for lack of a better term, to use the 2019 numbers. I talked to some political science friends of mine before doing this, and they encouraged me to just go for it and use the 2019 numbers, because Andy Bashir numbers, because they're the most recent. Andy Bashir, given his last poll, I think he had a 63% rating. It ranges between low 60s to upper 60s. I saw one in the 70s at one point early on.
Right.
So that might help some Democrats running in some of these areas. So I did use that, and I used the 2018 data to gather these analyses. So having said that qualifier, as far as races that are close, I'm going to look down at my screen here, so I'm not going to be looking at you. I apologize. But the ones I have here, I know a little bit more about the Lexington area seat, so I'll talk about some of those first. Some of the closest ones, I think, that are held by Republicans that could be potential pickups for Democrats would be the 81st down in Richmond, the Mike Eves versus Deanna Frazier race. I think that one is going to be really close. It may actually lean dim a little bit. Just looking at the numbers from last time, it looked good for Beshear. As far as other ones in the Lexington area, I have the 45th, which is Stan Lee's old seat. He retired. He was a very conservative guy in the House, and that area, from my understanding, has been trending bluer over time. So in his retirement, we have Shirley Flynn Mitchell, who's running as a Democrat, and we have Killian Timoney, who's running as a Republican. Now, Killian, interesting story about this race, as Killian and Shirley Flynn Mitchell are both co-endorsed by Kentucky 120 United, a teachers group, and Shirley got the endorsement of another teachers group. But they're both. I don't want to generalize here, but I think that race is going to be a really interesting one. I have it as a toss-up / lean Democrat in this situation because Killian, even though he's a Republican, is not. I don't believe he's as conservative as Stan Lee, and he's generally favored by teachers. But you also have Shirley Flynn Mitchell, who's has a very, very impressive resume and who is liked and is running a good campaign. So they both seem to be pretty popular in this area. So I'm really curious to know more about that one as well. If I had to pick two races to watch as far as local bellwethers, I would pick those two, the 45th and the 81st. I have plenty others on here, but those are those would probably be some of the top ones I would pay attention to.
Well, let's move west a little bit to Louisville. What do you think is happening with Kevin Bratcher and Jason Nemes? Both have been. Kevin Bratcher has been in the legislature for a while. Jason for 4 years. What do you think is happening with both of them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was trying to scroll through to see how I rated that one, but I believe that's going to be a close race. Jason Nemes, I know him a little bit from my time there, and he's relatively moderate. I think he knows very well that district is getting bluer, or it's pretty blue in the first place. So that's going to be that's certainly going to be an interesting race. I think that will be close. And he's tried to work across the aisle with Democrats on a number of issues. Right. I think that's a reflection of how close he realizes that district is. As far as the numbers in that, I have it pulled up here now. As far as the numbers, Beshear took that district by 14 points last year, and he won by I believe it was two percentage points last time. So that'll certainly be an interesting area to watch.
What about Bratcher?
Bratcher, yes. Okay. That's the 29th, and is running against Suzanne Kugler. And in that, I rated that one as a toss-up as well, because the reason I rated it as a toss-up, I generally give the incumbent a little bit of advantage just because they've been there for a while. And I mean, that may or may not be fair. It depends on their popularity. But Kevin Bratcher, he's been there, and he has, I think in 2018, he won by 6 points. And last year, Governor Beshear took that district by 12 points. So I think that's definitely a possible pickup for Democrats. We'll have to watch and see, though. Very curious about that one as well.
Yeah. Okay. So those are some in the suburbs and the burbs and the urban areas. Do you see anything out in the rural areas of the state where Dems could pick up?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on the chart, what I did was, over in the far right column, is I put down the areas of either lean or toss up, in places where either Democrats or Republicans currently control that house, currently control that seat. And I found that there were as many as 8 potential pickups for Democrats and 8 potential pickups for Republicans. And at the end of the night, it could be a wash.
Right.
It could be a pretty good night for Democrats and a pretty good night for Republicans. It just depends on what happens. But generally speaking, as we mentioned earlier, you have this kind of urban sprawl of of more liberal politics, and the rural areas getting redder. So, but before I get into that, I wanted to mention that there are a number of retirements. I didn't go through and count how many Democratic retirements and some Republican retirements as well. So,
Right.
in the rural areas, mostly in the rural areas, District 22, 93, 70, 47, Rick Rand's old seat, 70 is Sims, 93 is Chris Harris's old seat in Eastern Kentucky. And I put those down as unknowns, really, because all of those districts that I just mentioned, those 4 districts that I mentioned, went Republican last time by quite a margin. And
Right.
the Democrats in those regions were known and respected. They had been there a while in the community, and they decided to retire for different reasons. So I'm really curious to know what happens in those races, because a lot of those areas are trending Republican, or just have been Republican. They just like the representative that they had. So
Right.
as far as Democratic pick, and there's some others too that are closer. Kathy Hinkle, Dean Schmore, those races are pretty close, I think. Carolyn DuPont here in the west side of Lexington, but getting down into seats that Republicans hold that could potentially be Democratic pickups in a good year. There are a number of those. Just going down the list here, you have the 8th district, Pam Dossett versus Walker Thomas. I think that's going to be a close race. 99, Bill Redwine and Patrick White. Patrick White's, of course, a new representative that took control of Rocky Adkins' seat when Rocky Adkins was appointed to be Governor Beshear's senior advisor. So that was a special election, and I'm really curious to see what happens this time now that it's a normal. I don't know if you call it normal, but
Right.
a more normal election. I think that one will be close, but we'll have to see what happens with that one as well. Just a couple more. I won't go through the whole list, but District 69, Ryan Neves versus Adam Koenig.
Mm-hmm.
That one, in theory, should be close based upon previous polls. Adam won that race by, I believe, 10 points in 2018, but Beshear won it by a couple points last year, and it seems to be trending a little bit Democratic. And the last one I'll mention before I turn it back over to you is District 72, just north of Lexington. Here you have Todd Neese, who's an educator, and from what I understand, is a pretty well-known and well-respected guy in that area, running against Matthew Koch. And Matthew won that race by 4 points in 2018, and Beshear took it by about the same margin last year. So I think in theory that race could be close as well. There's some others on here, but I'll stop talking for a moment.
Let's jump to the Kentucky Senate for just a couple of races. What about Ryan Alexia up in northern Kentucky running against Chris McDaniel? Ryan has spent some money on ads, and McDaniel seems to be acting like he's worried, particularly considering some of the ads he's run. So do you have a sense of that one?
I don't have those numbers in front of me. I didn't analyze the Senate, but I do know both of them a little bit. I've gotten to know them over the years. I went to a debate when I was living up there in a previous race. From my understanding, from talking to people in northern Kentucky, Ryan Alexia is running a good race, a good strong race. I believe he's a veterinarian, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Chris McDaniels seems to be generally pretty well known and liked in that area. As far as numbers, I don't know. I think there's a possibility of a Dem pickup there, but as far as numbers, I couldn't tell you that one. Do you have any sense of that yourself?
Um, I think it's one of those situations like you were talking about with all these small communities in northern Kentucky that are young adult families. I mean, you look at Ryan Alexia's family photo for his campaign, and it's prototypical. You know, it's he's a young professional, wife, two small children. I mean, he looks like he just fits the area. But it's Northern Kentucky's tough because it's been
Hmm.
Republican for a long time. So, and Chris, you're
Yeah.
right. Chris McDaniel, I think, is well liked. The other one that I'm interested in the Senate is Glenn Hammond and Phillip Wheeler. Um, Phillip Wheeler, well, anyway, I don't want to say anything negative here, but I think Hammond has a shot at that. Do you have any sense of that one?
Yeah, I believe that one could be rated as a toss-up. Um,
Okay.
I don't know them very well personally, or neither do I know that area. But based upon people I've talked to and polling, I think that race could be pretty close.
So let's leave state legislature for a minute and let's go to Congress. We've got 6 congressional districts. I think we would probably all agree that the third district with Yarmouth is safely Democratic. Most people, I think, would assume that Hal Rogers is safe, and Guthrie and even Comer are probably all safe. The two that I'm interested in and that I would love to see flip is Massey in northern Kentucky and Andy Barr around Lexington. Do you have
Those are
a sense of either of those?
those are certainly really really interesting races. I do know Alexandra Owensby up running against Massey in northern Kentucky in the fourth district, I believe it is. And she's a good strong candidate. You know that region is very red. It's not as red as some of the other districts, as I believe 1, 2, and 5 maybe, but it is a pretty red district. But she's run a really good campaign. As far as Massey goes, I think he's made Republicans and Democrats and Independents all mad
Yeah.
evenly. So
Yeah.
that will be a really interesting to watch. I still think that one leans red, but that one's one of those unique ones. We'll have to watch that one closely and see what happens. I honestly don't know what to expect in that one. I do think it leans red, but you do have an unusual candidate on the Republican side and a strong candidate on the Democratic side.
Yeah.
As far as the 6th district here in the Lexington Greater area, Josh Hicks is a very strong candidate. Andy Barr seems to be liked in the Republican community, but he is a lightning rod figure in the
Yeah.
in the liberal Democrat and some independent community. The polling for that race, there's so much else going on that there hasn't been a whole lot of polling in that race. There was a poll done back several months ago that actually had Josh Hicks up by 2 points. So I'm curious about that one. Ben Chandler, he had that seat for a number of years,
Right.
and because of the rural areas, it trended a little bit more Republican. But most of those races were pretty close. Obviously, Amy McGrath lost that race by, I believe it was about 3 points last time.
Right.
So I'm curious in a presidential election to see what happens with Josh Hicks going up against Andy Barr. I would rate that one. I think most of the national pundits have rated that as lean or likely Republican, but I wouldn't be so sure of that. I think it's a little bit closer than that. I would expect it to be within. Certainly within 10 points, probably within 5 points.
I have a feeling, and this is not statistically based, but just watching Josh's race and some of the things that have happened, like Barr refusing to do another debate and some of the negative press he's gotten for that. And Josh has just been, in his face the whole race, just been out there. So I think Josh has a good shot there. I would love to see Dr. Owensby also have a good shot. That's a tough place, but she also has been right in Massey's face regularly with her ads and with her comments. Okay,
Yeah.
last one, and then we're going to do a wrap up. Do you have any sense, or do you want to go out on a limb about McConnell and Mcgrath?
That's a tough one as well. McConnell is really unpopular against a generic Democrat. A lot of people early on, as far as the friends I know who are independents or Republicans, go on and on and on about McConnell, how, we got to do something about him, term limits and all this stuff. And then you put what should be an ideal figure for moderate Democrats up against him. And, the polls suddenly change and McConnell's up again, even though they don't like him because all these, attack ads and all this other stuff, and for just various different reasons. Looking at the public polls, the race does not look good for Amy McGrath. But, if you talk to people about some internal polls, they say it's tightening and it's closer, and it's going to be a lot closer than you think come election day.
I distinctly remember Allison Grimes, that race, and the polling and so on and so forth, and all of a sudden here on election day it goes the other way.
By a lot, yeah.
Yeah, I get a sense that it's tightening, and I had her on the show a couple of weeks ago, and I talked to her about this. It seemed to me that she had found her voice and her footing in the last 6 weeks. I really got the impression early on that she was being managed too much. And then lately it feels like she's just coming out and swinging. And I don't know. I have a feeling that it is going to be closer than you think. And I think the polls are missing some of this late breaking stuff for her. So I'm not saying she's going to win. But I think there's a really good chance that it's going to be close, and I think she actually has a shot. So
I've heard a lot of people echo that sentiment. I've heard quite a few people say just in the last month or so that her campaign, as far as her appearances on different shows, and there's just more motivation there. There's more energy on the ground and different places in the state. And I was in Eastern Kentucky last weekend, just driving through, and I saw more McGrath signs than I thought I would see, and I also saw a number of other local Democratic signs than I thought I would see in these Republican towns, like Ralph Hoskins, for example. It's one of the unknowns that I put. We have Derek Lewis, going back to the House very quickly. We have Derek Lewis, Robert Goforth, and some other races like that where there have been some personal issues. Mm-hmm. So I'm really curious as to how those races turn out, even though they're in bright red districts. How will that affect those races?
Right. So, wrapping up, if you were going to put a number on it, what would you say the House turns out? Is it a Democratic gain of 3-4 seats, a Republican gain? What do you think is going to happen?
That's a really tough one. I've thought about that, and I've talked to political scientists. I've gone back and forth on it. I originally had said between 1 and 3 Democrat pickups. Some other friends of mine think that's optimistic for Democrats because there's so many retirements in red districts. We will have I think we will have at least a few pickups in the urban areas. But a lot of those will be offset by losses in rural areas. So I think it'll be, pretty close to not a lot of pickups on either side. It'll be close to zero. I think if that bell curve looks like this and the zero will be up here at the top, it's certainly possible to have, maybe 1 to 3 pickups on either side. As many as 8, I think, could be feasibly possible on either side. I think if I were to make my best guess, I would say Democrats pick up 1 or 2 seats.
Okay. Overall, you mean?
Overall.
Okay.
Yeah, net.
Which would that break the Republican supermajority?
Let's see. what is the number again? 62.
I think it would.
If we picked up 3 seats, I believe it would. If Democrats picked up 3 seats, I believe that will be the case. So it'll be an interest. It's going to be a tough election night because so many people are worried about what's going on at the national level.
Right.
But you're going to have so many local seats that it's going to take a few days to just take all this in.
Yeah. I'm fairly sure that I'm correct in that Kentucky allows local boards of elections to start counting absentee ballots when they come in. And so I think that unlike some other states, Kentucky may have most of, not all, but most of our results election night.
Yeah, that's one advantage that we have. Those ballots are being processed as they come in right now. So
right.
I'm not sure how much that's going to tell us about national politics. We'll have to watch for Florida and North Carolina and some other fast processing state. Well, relatively faster processing states for that.
Right.
But I am excited about Election Day and nervous at the same time.
Oh yeah. 2020 has been 5 years long.
Yes.
So just let me let everybody know that if you are a paying member of Forward Kentucky, we're going to put up a cheat sheet for election night where you can print it out and keep track of all these that we've talked about. We'll put in Trent's races that he thinks are something to watch and Robert's, and give you a cheat sheet for the legislature and for Congress. So if you're a member, be sure and pick that up. And if you're not a member, you should become one. That's how that works. Trent Garrison, thank you so much for being with us. And we may get together again a week or two after the election and see how it all came out.
Let's do that. That sounds good. I appreciate you having me. This is fun.
All right, good. Thanks everybody for watching. Next week we are trying to put together a post-election analysis show with a couple of people, but whatever happens, we'll be back next Friday at noon. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.